and Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mind and Deen podcast with Ayeesha and Hana. Today's episode is going to be on anxiety.
So, anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as worry or fear, that can be either mild or severe. Everyone has feelings of anxiety at some point in their life, and it's a very normal thing.
For example, you may kind of feel worried or anxious just before sitting an exam or just before a job interview.
Or before recording an episode.
Yeah, and just like Hannah said, during these times, it's completely normal to feel anxious.
hmm Anxiety can be a good thing. It can help us plan and prepare for things, help us sense danger. It can also help us feel motivated.
But sometimes our brains can trick us into feeling anxious in certain situations that may not actually be stressful or dangerous.
Yeah, and this can be counterproductive if it gets in the way of their everyday tasks. So, anxiety is an innate human response and it can be explained through flight, fight, or freeze, which is something you guys have probably heard of.
So this is built within us, and it's a response to dangerous, fearful stimuli.
Sometimes our body can sense danger that isn't a real threat, and this is where fight, flight, or freeze systems kick in.
Yep, and this is when the body kind of releases chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline, which can help us to take action and protect ourselves from the threat. And with all these chemicals in our bodies, we can sometimes feel uncomfortable bodily sensations that can lead to us experiencing a fast heartbeat, upset stomach, or tense muscles.
hmm and you can have either fight, flight, or freeze. You don't have to have all of them. So I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit more of a freeze and then fight kind of person. What are you, Aisha?
I think I'm also a freeze, but I think I'll be a flight person and just run away from the situation. But I think it's important to keep in mind that those symptoms, like those uncomfortable body sensations, will kind of pass. It's just a natural response that we have to an anxiety provoking situation, and it will kind of pass and settle
Yeah.
after some time.
And so the experience of anxiety is like being on a roller coaster. So it has to go up before it comes back down.
Yep.
But it will come back down. Like it's physically impossible to have anxiety going on in our body for a long period of time. But you can
Yeah.
have intense feelings of anxiousness, but it does come down in the end.
Sometimes you just kind of have to wait it out.
hmm So sometimes when you are in a situation, this is not the first thing you think of. You kind of think of you get caught up in the symptoms, the body sensations, and it's very hard to think outside of that situation. Does that make sense?
So sometimes it can be like a misinterpretation of the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So just say like your heart starts racing and your palms are sweaty and then you're feeling out of breath. You might kind of feel like you're having a heart attack. And
Yeah,
that thought and that fear will just make you feel even worse and even more anxious. And that kind of just makes the physical symptoms even worse as well.
yeah. And that's what happens when you have panic attacks
Mm,
or people with panic disorder. So I've had a panic attack before and it's it's not the nicest feeling. Like
mm,
you feel like you're either gonna faint or like pretty much you feel like you're gonna die at the moment. I can't lie.
yeah, yeah.
But like any other anxious feeling, it does come back down. I think you
Mm.
just need to kind of remind yourself in the moment, and then there are obviously things that help you in the moment that can kind of calm those symptoms down.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like you said, it's important just to remind yourself that this is just your body's normal response and reaction to this situation, to this stressful situation. So your body's kind of getting ready to either, yeah, fight, flight, or freeze. It will kind of pass and settle.
Yeah. So you have different types of anxiety. You have health anxiety, PTSD, social anxiety.
Separation anxiety, specific phobias, agoraphobia, and panic disorder.
So health anxiety is when you spend a lot of time worrying that you're ill or you're going to get ill, and this worry kind of starts to take over every aspect of your life.
And then PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health condition caused by stressful, frightening, or distressing events.
And often people with PTSD, they can get triggered easily
Mm.
if they smell or if they come across very similar situations.
Yeah, and that can cause them to have like flashbacks to the time,
Yeah.
to the stressful experience. Yeah,
Hmm. And social anxiety disorder, also called social phobia, is a long term and overwhelming fear of social situations.
and interactions. Yeah, we also have separation anxiety. So this is like kind of like fear of strangers, and it's common in young children between the
Hmm.
ages of 6 months and 3 years. But it is a normal kind of part of a child's development, and they usually do grow out of it.
Yeah, I think it becomes more of a problem if you have kids that find it difficult to stay away from parents or their home um, long term. So
Mm.
when it gets in the way of them going to school and taking part in different activities.
And then specific phobias are an extreme fear of objects or situations that pose little or no danger, but they just kind of make you feel really anxious. So you might kind of try to stay away from these things.
Are there any examples of specific phobias?
Is having a fear of a spider one?
Yeah, what is that called? Arachnophobia.
Yes, I was gonna say
Yes.
agoraphobia, but that's the next one. But arachnophobia is the correct one, yeah, for
Yeah.
spiders. Oh, like,
Or claustrophobia. Yeah, that can be one. Fear of
yeah,
closed spaces.
yeah.
Yeah. And then you have agoraphobia, like you said, is a fear of being in situations where escape might be difficult or
Mm.
that help wouldn't be available if things go wrong.
Yeah, in crowds, or if you're feeling like claustrophobic as well, in like a lift, elevator,
Ah, okay.
in situations where you feel like there might not be a way out, in closed spaces
Mm-hmm.
where, yeah, getting out might be a bit difficult. So you kind of avoid taking lifts or going on journeys.
And then you have agoraphobia, like you said, which is a fear of being in situations where escape might be difficult or that help wouldn't be available if things go wrong. So, an example of that might be,
Kind of being in situations like public areas, like shopping centers, where there's crowds, queues, kind of being outside of your own home can be quite unsettling for someone who has agoraphobia.
mm-hmm. And then you have panic disorder. So, the core symptoms of panic disorder is recurrent panic attacks,
Hmm.
an overwhelming combination of physical and psychological kind of distress. So during an attack, several symptoms can occur like sweating, trembling, feeling very dizzy, so feeling like you're going to faint.
Yeah,
Um,
heart palpitations as well, like an
yeah,
increase in your heart rate, chest pain, feeling dizzy, lightheaded.
yeah, fear of dying. So,
Yeah.
yeah, like you feel like you're going to have a heart attack and die. That's literally how you feel.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
So quite intense symptoms.
and
Cool.
people who have panic disorder, because these symptoms are quite severe, they
Mm.
think that they might believe that they have some other life threatening illness.
Mm. But actually, they don't. It's just because of how intense their symptoms feel. That's
Yeah.
how they, yeah, that's how they think. And then we also have GAD. So this is generalized anxiety disorder. So this is a long-term condition that causes people to feel anxious most days. That they often like really struggle to remember the last time they felt relaxed. And yeah, it said that around 1 in 20 people will experience GAD to an
Oh, wow.
extent that it has a significant impact on their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 in 20 is quite a high number.
Mm. I think it is very common, especially since the pandemic as well. I feel like it's
Yeah.
probably even higher now, that
Yeah, I think the
number.
pandemic contributed to a lot of anxiety
Mm.
for everyone. So, people with GAD experience uncontrollable worry and anxiety about lots of different things, alongside having difficult physical symptoms such as sleep difficulties, problems concentrating, or feeling restless.
some other symptoms can also be dizziness, heart palpitations as well.
Yeah. So, do we know what keeps anxiety going?
Yeah, so there are quite a few things that maintains anxiety. So I think a big one is avoidance. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
avoiding anxiety provoking situations or avoiding your triggers. So for example, if you kind of feel anxious going on trains or using public transport, kind of staying away from that can maintain the anxiety because in the short term, yeah, you're helping yourself avoid that anxiety attack or panic attack that you might
Mm.
have had if you were on that train. But in the long run, you're not helping yourself in any way because you're not facing that fear or confronting it.
Yeah, I think that's a common experience for all of us. Like, if we're scared of something, then we
Mm.
tend to avoid it instead of face it.
Yeah, yeah, because you think that's probably the best option and best solution for ourselves, but actually it isn't, and it can be very unhelpful.
Yeah, and unless it's like an actually dangerous, like a life or death kind of situation,
Mm.
um, I think with increased anxiety, our body kind of tells us that even stuff like getting on the train to work might be like a life or death situation.
Mm.
So, which
Yeah,
is why I think avoiding it is the easier strategy. Then you have reassurance seeking.
yeah.
So this is asking people around you or getting information from things around you that everything's going to be okay.
Mm.
Um, Kids do this a lot. So if you have a kid that keeps asking you if they're going to be okay in class tomorrow, or if they have a presentation and everything's going to be
Mm.
fine, without that reassurance, they won't be able to face that situation,
Yeah,
and they kind of rely on that reassurance to face it, if that
yeah, like
makes
they kind
sense.
of hold on to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, kind
And
of checking symptoms online can be reassurance seeking, or kind of
mm,
constantly booking GP appointments just to kind of get that reassurance that these are normal symptoms.
yeah. And like you said, with avoidance, it can make sense in the short term, but in the long term it doesn't help you face your anxiety. And with younger kids, I think parents also tend to reassure kids a lot. Like, it's a very natural response to reassure someone,
Mm.
especially a child, that things are going to be okay, because you don't want them to feel as anxious about a situation. But
Yeah.
then if you do have kids that worry a lot, then what that does is they they believe that they're dependent on that reassurance, and
Mm.
then it doesn't really help them question what they're worried about or why they're scared of a certain situation, and just kind of keeps it maintained.
It's a difficult one because obviously you want to help your kids feel better and not be worried, not be anxious, but actually that
Yeah,
reassurance giving, reassurance seeking can, yeah, be really unhelpful without us
yeah.
realizing it.
And when you work with parents, it's like they don't realize that they do it half the time, because it
Mm.
is such a natural response, and
Yeah.
we kind of tell them to be aware of or be mindful of what they're reassuring. So if they're reassuring their child's anxiety or the anxious thoughts or expectations, then we kind of tell them to stop doing that. But
Mm.
that doesn't mean that you can't reassure otherwise, like you can reassure other behaviors.
And sometimes the belief about worrying or around worrying can also maintain the anxiety. So we might kind of believe that worrying is helpful. So it kind of gives us control over the uncertainty of life. You might kind of think that the worrying prevented that negative event from actually happening. So if you are really, really worried about something and you're thinking about it constantly, but the next day it never even happened, you might think that, oh, it's because I over prepared, I over worried about it, I really gave it thought. That's what prevented it from happening. Next time I will continue to do that. I will continue to over plan, over prepare, because that helps me to kind of be in control of that
Ah,
worry.
that's interesting, because that's like reverse psychology,
Mm,
or
yeah,
like you're preparing yourself, or it's like a safety cushion almost.
exactly. But it can be sometimes really unhelpful when your thoughts spiral like
Mm,
that.
yeah,
Like when you kind of imagine and think about all the possibilities of an event, all you're doing is kind of spiraling, catastrophizing, and it
yeah,
can turn to like a really big snowball. Like just imagine a snowball rolling down a hill. It's going to just get bigger and bigger with all your worries, all your
yeah.
concerns, stresses. And yeah, that can be also very unhelpful and maintain that anxiety?
So to get through anxiety, a lot of us rely on either unhelpful habits or coping behaviors. So,
Mm-hmm.
unhelpful habits are behaviors that we depend upon to face the anxious situation, and it can be helpful in the short run, but doesn't help us in overcoming our anxiety in the long run. So, for example, what we said about reassurance seeking,
Yeah.
um, using our phones if we're on the train, no eye contact when walking down the street, or going shopping at less busy hours. And this might
Mm.
seem like it makes sense because you're like, oh, it, I'm still doing it, but I'm less anxious when I do it like this.
Mm.
But so it doesn't really help you face your anxiety because at first you feel like you're still going through that situation. But then if you only go shopping at times when it's a bit more calm,
Yeah.
then when you do end up in a situation where there might be a few extra people, then it
Mm.
still brings up the anxiety. Or if you're always using your phone on the train and one day your phone like doesn't work or you can't get a hang of it, then it brings up the anxiety again. So you kind of become dependent on those behaviors to go through that situation.
Ah, okay. So it's kind of like carrying a water bottle with you as well on the train. Is that an
Yes, yeah,
example?
that's a more common one.
And kind of really being like when you do, if you forget that water bottle, you feel really anxious and really overwhelmed because you've always had it with you that whole time.
Drinking water when you're stressed, it helps with the symptoms because one of the
Mm.
symptoms is like having a dry mouth or
Yeah, dry throat. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. So what's the difference between coping behaviors then? Like what are coping behaviors?
So coping behaviors are behaviors that we use to help us face the worry while managing our anxiety. So
Okay.
it's healthy habits that we can rely on to face our anxiety. So, for example, deep breathing,
Yeah.
grounding techniques like looking at different colors around you, touching different objects, just to be present in the moment,
Yeah.
or even talking about your worries to someone next to you, or you have progressive muscle relaxation. So, these are all different methods in which we're coping with the symptoms of anxiety, but we're not dependent on it to face that situation.
Okay. So
If
kind
that
of like
makes sense.
mindfulness techniques to manage the anxiety,
Yeah,
the helpful behaviors.
yeah,
Okay, nice. Yeah, that does make sense. And we will definitely be talking about these coping behaviors and other techniques in more detail that can help us to manage our anxiety in an upcoming episode.
yeah. And the fine line between unhelpful habits and coping behaviors. So, a lot of behaviors initially can seem like coping behaviors. For
Mm,
example, carrying a water bottle can seem initially like a good thing
yeah.
and it allows you to get through that situation. But then, if you feel like you can't ever go through a situation without holding that bottle, that's when it becomes unhelpful. When we
I think,
work with clients, we kind of recommend if they do have unhelpful habits, then we kind
yeah.
of help them wean off it once they start facing that, like their fear or their
Mm,
worried situation more often.
yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think that is a really good example to help you differentiate between what's unhelpful and what is a positive coping behavior. So, just like with low mood, anxiety is also acknowledged within Islam.
Hmm.
And now we're just going to be talking about the Islamic perspective of anxiety and how it presents.
Yeah, so you have anxiety and worry that have been mentioned in different hadiths, in the Quran, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, has openly spoken about anxiety and how it's a normal human emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a story that I came across recently about one of the Sahabas where he was found sitting in the masjid between two prayer times, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, went up to him and asked why he's there because it's a bit odd that you're saying in between two prayer times. And then he said that he was there because he had a lot of worries and he had a lot of debts.
Mm.
And in this moment, it's quite nice, it's quite beautiful. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he acknowledged his feelings. So he didn't say that if you're a good Muslim, then and you have strong faith, then you can't be experiencing these symptoms.
Mm.
But instead, he validates his emotions, he um, acknowledges them, and then I think he shared a dua that he can say that can help him with his anxieties. Yeah, which is really nice to think about, because a lot of the time a lot of people say that if you're a good Muslim, then you can't experience mental health problems or you can't experience any worry. So if you're praying and if you're going to the masjid, then like it can't be part of your life.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Like you shouldn't be feeling down, you shouldn't be feeling anxious, but I
yeah,
guess that just shows us that it is okay. Um, and yeah, it is normalized, but it's just about kind of using prayer, making dua,
yeah,
pondering, just to kind of find that, that strength again.
yeah. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, also says that when a person is experiencing difficulty, then he should view it as a blessing from Allah,
Mm.
which is quite hard to do, but
Yeah, yeah. No, it can be really hard to do that, to kind of see things in a positive light when there's always so much, negativity or lots of stress in our lives. It can be hard to kind of see things in that positive way.
yeah, and that kind of also ties with what we spoke about before about cognitive restructuring.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
about reshaping those thoughts, those negative thoughts that we might have.
I just wanted to kind of read some quotes as like a little reflection.
Aisha, the
So,
quote master.
so in Islam, we are taught that life is full of tests. So it's important to embrace that uncertainty and
Hmm.
see everything as a blessing, just like you mentioned, and to also trust that God knows what is best for us, as this will strengthen our faith. So, one relevant quote is: perhaps you like something that is bad for you and you dislike something that is good for you.
Mm,
And I think this just tells us that difficult moments that we go through may actually be our greatest blessings without us realizing. And of course, Allah knows best. These tests have a greater purpose, and sadness, this fear that we may feel, the loss, the grief, the worry, it's all inevitable. Allah also tells us that we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to those who patiently persevere.
those are beautiful quotes. Thank you, Aisha, for sharing them. But I was
Yeah.
just thinking as you were speaking,
Mm.
these can also be our coping mechanisms when we face problems
Yeah,
in
like
a
kind of
way.
reminding yourself of these quotes, right?
Yeah. Okay, so in essence, to summarize, there are several types of anxiety and they all present in different ways. It can occur in different
So,
times in your life, and
yeah.
it's important to understand your own symptoms so that you know how to manage your difficulties, because what works for one person doesn't work for the other person.
And in the next episode, we will be talking about how to manage these symptoms of anxiety that we may have and we may experience. So make sure you tune into that one if you found today's episode insightful and helpful.
Yes, and as always, thank you for tuning in and listening and supporting us. See you all next episode.